Yuna had spent 3 years on the Kelthari space station, and in all that time, she had learned one simple truth. Humans were not welcome here. They were tolerated. They were allowed to exist. But they were never truly accepted. She walked through the lower corridors of the station every morning, keeping her eyes down and her steps quick. The Kelthari who passed her never looked at her directly. They looked through her, as if she was nothing more than a shadow on the wall. Sometimes they would make sounds of disgust. Sometimes they would move to the other side of the corridor, just to avoid being near her. Yuna had stopped feeling hurt by it long ago. Now she just felt tired. The Kelthari were a proud species. They stood over 2 meters tall, with bodies covered in golden fur and faces that looked like great lions from Earth. Their eyes were sharp and intelligent. Their voices were deep and commanding. They had ruled their part of the galaxy for thousands of years, and they believed themselves to be the greatest species in existence. Humans, in their eyes, were something lesser, small, weak, emotional. Humans lived short lives and made foolish decisions. Humans cried when they were sad and laughed when they were happy. To the Kelthari, this was a sign of weakness. A species that could not control its feelings was a species that could not be trusted. Yuna was a xenobiologist. She had studied alien life forms for years before coming to this station. She had dreamed of working alongside other species, learning about their worlds, and making discoveries that would benefit everyone. Instead, she spent her days in a small laboratory in the lower levels of the station, cataloging plant samples that nobody cared about. Her colleague Taiho worked in the communications department. He was one of the few humans she could talk to freely. They often ate their meals together in the small human quarters, away from the judgmental eyes of the Kelthari. "You look tired today," Taiho said one evening. Pushing a bowl of food toward her, Yuna sighed and picked up her eating sticks. "I am always tired. Did something happen?" "The same thing that always happens." I tried to share my research findings with the senior scientists. They did not even let me finish speaking. One of them said that human observations cannot be trusted because our senses are too primitive. Taiho shook his head slowly. "I told you not to bother. They will never listen to us. Then why are we here?" Yuna asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "Why did they even allow us on this station if they think we are worthless?" "Because galactic law requires diplomatic exchange between species. They had to accept some humans. They just make sure we know our place." Yuna ate her food in silence after that. She knew Taiho was right. The humans on this station were here only because the rules demanded it. They were given the lowest jobs and the smallest rooms. They were kept away from anything important. The Kelthari had a sacred wing on the upper levels of the station. It was the most important place for their species. The nursery was there, where the cubs of the noble bloodlines were raised. No human had ever been allowed to even see it. The doors to that section were guarded at all times, and the punishment for trespassing was severe. Yuna had never thought much about the sacred wing. It was not her concern. She had enough problems in her own small corner of the station. But that night, everything changed. She was working late in her laboratory, running tests on a new batch of plant samples, when the lights flickered. A moment later, the alarm system activated. The sound was loud and sharp, echoing through the corridors. Yuna had heard alarms before, but this one was different. This one kept going, getting louder and more urgent. Then it stopped suddenly. Complete silence. That was when Yuna knew something was very wrong. She stepped out of her laboratory and looked down the corridor. Red emergency lights were flashing. Kelthari were running past her, their faces filled with fear. She had never seen them afraid before. The Kelthari were always calm and controlled. But now they were panicking. What is happening? She called out to one of them. The Kelthari did not answer. He pushed past her and kept running. Una followed the crowd until she reached a large gathering near the central lifts. Hundreds of Kelthari were standing there, speaking in rapid voices. Some of them were crying. Una had never heard a Kelthari cry before. She pushed her way closer, trying to understand what was going on. Finally, she caught pieces of the conversation. The sacred nursery, life support failure, toxic gas, the cubs. The High Elder's cubs are trapped inside. They cannot get through the doors. The seals have failed. Una felt her blood go cold. The cubs, the children of the High Elder, the leader of all the Kelthari. They were trapped in a room filling with poison gas. She looked around at the crowd. The Kelthari rescue teams were working frantically at the sealed doors, but they could not break through. The doors were reinforced with the strongest materials in the galaxy. They were designed to protect the cubs from any attack. Now, they were keeping everyone out. There must be another way in, someone said. The maintenance shaft, another replied. But it is too small. No Kelthari can fit through it. Then send a drone. The drones cannot navigate the damaged sections. The corridor has collapsed in places. Only something with hands and intelligence could get through. Una listened to these words, and something stirred inside her. The maintenance shaft was too small for a Kelthari. But she was not a Kelthari. She was a human, small, weak. Everything the Kelthari despised about her species, but also small enough to fit. She pushed through the crowd without thinking. She did not plan what she was going to do. She did not consider the consequences. She only knew that there were children dying on the other side of those walls. And she might be the only one who could reach them. The guards at the entrance to the sacred wing raised their weapons when they saw her approaching. Their golden eyes burned with anger. Human, you are not permitted here. Leave now. Una did not stop. She ran faster. She ducked under the arm of the first guard and slipped past the second one. She heard their roars of outrage behind her, but she did not look back. The entrance to the maintenance shaft was just ahead. It was a small opening in the wall, barely large enough for her to squeeze through. She dropped to her knees and crawled inside. The last thing she heard before the darkness swallowed her was Taiho's voice calling her name. But she could not stop now. She would not stop. Because somewhere ahead of her, in the poisoned darkness, 3 small cubs were waiting for someone to save them, and Una was the only one who could. The maintenance shaft was dark and hot. Una crawled forward on her hands and knees, feeling the metal burn against her skin. The air was thick and hard to breathe. She could taste something bitter in her mouth, and she knew that the toxic gas was already seeping into the shaft. She tore a strip of cloth from her uniform and pressed it against her nose and mouth. It would not protect her for long, but it might give her a few extra minutes. That was all she needed. Just a few more minutes stopped behind her. She could hear the muffled sounds of chaos. The Kelthari guards were shouting. Someone was trying to follow her into the shaft, but they were too big. Their bodies could not fit through the narrow opening. She heard one of them curse in frustration. Good. They could not stop her now. The shaft twisted and turned in the darkness. Una could not see where she was going. She could only feel the walls around her and hope that she was moving in the right direction. The metal grew hotter as she moved forward. In some places, the walls had buckled from the damage, and she had to squeeze through gaps barely wider than her shoulders. Her hands were burning. She looked down and saw that her palms were red and blistered. The pain was sharp and constant, but she did not stop. She could not stop. How long had she been crawling? It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. Time moved strangely in the darkness. Every second felt like an eternity. Then she heard it. A soft sound, barely audible over the hum of the damaged systems. It was a whimpering cry, high-pitched and weak. The sound of a child in pain. Yuna moved faster. Her lungs were burning now, each breath a struggle. The cloth over her mouth was doing less and less to filter the poisoned air. She could feel herself getting dizzy, but she pushed the feeling away. She would not faint. She would not give up. The shaft opened into a larger space, and Yuna tumbled out onto a cold floor. She coughed and gasped for air, trying to clear her lungs. The room around her was filled with a thin haze of gas. Emergency lights blinked red and orange, casting strange shadows on the walls. And there, in the corner of the room, she saw them. 3 cubs huddled together in a small nest of soft blankets. They were tiny, smaller than she had expected. Their golden fur was matted and dull. Their eyes were barely open, and their breathing was shallow and weak. They looked up at her with fear and confusion. Yuna crawled toward them. Her body ached in 100 different places, but she forced herself to move. She reached the cubs and gathered them into her arms. They were heavier than human babies, their bodies dense with muscle, even at this young age. But she held them anyway, pressing them against her chest. "I have got you," she whispered, though she knew they could not understand her words. "I have got you. You are safe now." The cubs whimpered and pressed closer to her. Their small claws dug into her skin, drawing blood, but she did not care. She held them tighter. Now she had to get out. Yuna looked back at the shaft she had come through. The gas was thicker now, pouring in from the damaged ventilation system. She could not take the cubs back through that way. They were too weak. The poison would kill them before they reached the other side. There had to be another exit. She stood up slowly, the cubs still clutched in her arms. Her legs shook beneath her weight. She looked around the room, searching for anything that might help. The main doors were sealed shut, locked by the emergency systems. But there, on the far wall, she saw another maintenance hatch. It was larger than the one she had entered through. She stumbled toward it, each step a battle against her failing body. The cubs clung to her, their small faces buried against her neck. She could feel their hearts beating fast against her chest. The hatch was stuck. Yuna pulled at it with one hand, keeping the cubs secure with the other. The metal groaned, but did not move. She pulled harder, screaming with effort, and finally the hatch broke free. Fresh air rushed in, and Yuna nearly collapsed with relief. She crawled through the opening, pushing herself forward with the last of her strength. The shaft on this side was cooler and cleaner. She could breathe again, but she was so tired. Her vision was blurring at the edges. The burns on her hands throbbed with pain. The poison she had breathed was making her head spin. Just a little further. Just a little more. She crawled and crawled. The cubs held tight against her body. She could feel them relaxing slightly as the air grew cleaner. They stopped whimpering and started making soft chirping sounds instead. It was a sound of comfort, she realized. They felt safe in her arms. Finally, she saw light ahead. The end of the shaft. She pushed forward and tumbled out onto a metal floor. The world exploded into noise and movement. People were everywhere. Kelthari faces looked down at her with shock and disbelief. Someone was shouting for medical help. Someone else was trying to take the cubs from her arms, but the cubs would not let go. They clung to Yuna with surprising strength, their small claws digging into her clothes. When a Kelthari medic reached for them, they snarled and turned their faces away. "Get back," someone commanded. "Do not touch them." Yuna was too weak to understand what was happening. She lay on the cold floor, the cubs still pressed against her chest, and watched the scene unfold through hazy eyes. She saw Taiho pushing through the crowd, his face pale with worry. He dropped to his knees beside her and took her hand. "Yuna! Yuna, can you hear me?" She tried to answer, but no words came out. Only a weak cough. She saw Commander Nari, the human military officer, shouting orders at the Keltari guards. There was anger in her voice, but also something else. Something like awe, and then she saw him. High Elder Vorth, the leader of all the Kelthari on this station. The father of the 3 cubs she held in her arms. He was massive, even by Kelthari standards. His golden fur was thick and streaked with silver. His eyes were deep and ancient, filled with the weight of countless years. He stood at the edge of the crowd, completely still, staring at Yuna with an expression she could not read. Behind him, other Kelthari were whispering. Some looked angry. Some looked confused. Some looked afraid. She entered the sacred wing without permission, one of them said. She must be punished. She saved the cubs, another replied. Look at them. They are alive because of her. It does not matter. The law is clear. No human may enter the sacred wing. The argument grew louder, but Vorth said nothing. He just kept staring at Yuna and his cubs, his expression unreadable. And then the cubs did something that silenced everyone. They lifted their small heads from Yuna's chest. They opened their mouths, and they made a sound. It was unlike anything Yuna had ever heard. A cry that was both beautiful and strange, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed to echo through the very walls of the station. It vibrated in her bones and made her heart ache with an emotion she could not name. The Kelthari around her froze. Every single one of them went completely still, their eyes wide with shock. High Elder Vorth took a step backward, as if he had been struck. Yuna did not understand what was happening. She only knew that the cubs were crying, and somehow, that cry was changing everything. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. Yuna drifted in and out of darkness. Sometimes she could hear voices speaking in languages she did not understand. Sometimes she felt hands touching her, treating her wounds. Sometimes she felt the warm weight of small bodies pressed against her side. The cubs never left her. When she finally opened her eyes, she was in a room she did not recognize. The walls were made of white stone that seemed to glow with a soft golden light. The ceiling was high and decorated with patterns that looked like stars. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she had ever felt. This was not the human quarters. This was not even the medical wing she knew. This was somewhere else entirely. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body and she fell back against the pillows. Her hands were wrapped in clean bandages. Her chest felt tight, and every breath was an effort. Do not move too much, a voice said. Yuna turned her head and saw Taiho sitting in a chair beside her bed. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and worry lines on his face. But he was smiling. How do you feel? He asked. Like I was crawled through fire, Yuna said weakly. What happened? Where am I? Taiho leaned forward. His expression was strange, caught between amazement and disbelief. You are in the sacred recovery wing. It is a place reserved for those who carry the blessing of the cubs. He paused. No human has ever been here before. No outsider of any species has ever been here. Yuna blinked. I do not understand. Neither do I fully. But something happened when those cubs cried. Something that has never happened before in Kelthari history. Yuna remembered the cry. That strange, beautiful sound that had silenced everyone in the corridor. She remembered the shock on the faces of the Kelthari, the way even High Elder Vorth had stepped backward. What kind of cry was it? She asked. Taiho was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke carefully, as if he was still trying to believe his own words. In Kelthari culture, newborn cubs make a special cry only once in their lives. It is called the cry of bonding. It happens when they recognize someone as their true protector, their guardian. It is the most sacred sound in their culture. Yuna felt something cold settle in her stomach. And the cubs made this cry for me? They made it for you. All three of them, together. Taiho shook his head slowly. In 10,000 years of Kelthari history, this cry has only ever been made for Kelthari parents. It was believed to be impossible for cubs to bond with anyone outside their species. The scientists thought it was purely biological, built into their very blood. But they cried for me, Yuna whispered. They cried for you, and they will not stop clinging to you. The Kelthari medics have tried to take them away several times. Every time, the cubs fight to stay with you. They become distressed when they are separated from you, even for a moment. Yuna looked to her other side. There, in a small cradle next to her bed, 3 pairs of golden eyes watched her. The cubs were awake, their small bodies pressed together. When they saw her looking at them, they made soft chirping sounds and reached toward her with their tiny paws without thinking. Yuna stretched out her bandaged hand. One of the cubs grabbed her finger and held it tightly. Something warm bloomed in her chest. Something she had not expected to feel. The Kelthari do not know what to do, Taiho continued. Some of them want to honor the bonding. They say the cubs have spoken, and their voice must be respected. Others say this is impossible, that something must be wrong with the cubs. The human cannot be their guardian. What does the High Elder say? Yuna asked. He has not spoken publicly yet, but he has visited this room 3 times while you were sleeping. He stands by the door and watches. He does not say anything. He just watches. Yuna did not know what to make of that. High Elder Varth was the most powerful Kelthari in this sector of space. His word was law. If he decided that she was a threat to his children, he could have her executed. If he decided to honor the bonding, it would change everything. Over the next few days, Yuna slowly recovered. Her lungs healed. Her burns began to fade. She was still weak, but she could sit up and eat and speak without pain. The cubs stayed with her through all of it. They slept curled up beside her. They cried when she was taken for medical treatments and only calmed down when she returned. The Kelthari healers treated her with a strange mixture of respect and confusion. They had never cared for a human before. They did not quite know how to behave around her. But they were gentle, and they made sure she had everything she needed. News of what had happened spread quickly. Taiho told her that the entire station was talking about her. The story had already reached other Kelthari worlds. A human woman who had risked her life to save the High Elder's cubs. A human woman who had been chosen through the sacred cry of bonding. Some called it a miracle. Some called it an abomination. Commander Nari came to visit on the 4th day. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a military bearing. She had been the highest-ranking human on the station before all of this happened. You have caused quite a situation, Nari said, sitting down in the chair that Taiho usually occupied. I did not mean to, Yuna replied. I just wanted to save the children. I know. That is what makes it so remarkable. Nari leaned back and studied her. Do you understand what you have done? Not just the rescue, but what came after. Taiho explained the cry of bonding to me. Did he explain what it means for human-Kelthari relations? For the past 12 years, since first contact, the Kelthari have treated us like lesser beings. They allow us on their stations because galactic law requires it, but they have never accepted us as equals. They look down on us. They despise our emotions, our short lives, our physical weakness. Nari paused, her expression intense. But now, 3 cubs of the highest bloodline have chosen a human as their guardian, in front of witnesses, using a bond that is sacred beyond measure. The Kelthari cannot simply ignore this. It challenges everything they believe about humans. Yuna looked down at the cubs in their cradle. They were sleeping now, their small chests rising and falling in steady rhythm. They looked so peaceful, so innocent. They had no idea what their cry had done. What will happen to me? She asked quietly. That depends on High Elder Varth. He has the final word on all matters concerning his bloodline. He could reject the bonding and have you sent away. He could accept it and make you part of his family. Or he could do something in between. Nari shook her head. No one knows what he is thinking. He has not spoken to anyone about this. On the 5th day, High Elder Varth finally came to speak with her. He arrived alone, without guards or advisors. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his massive frame blocking the light from the corridor. Then he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Yuna sat up straighter, ignoring the pain in her body. She met his eyes without looking away. It took all of her courage, but she refused to show weakness. Varth crossed to the cradle and looked down at his cubs. They were awake now, watching him with curious eyes. But they did not reach for him. Instead, they looked at Yuna. They should have reached for me, Varth said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. I am their father. I am their blood. But they looked to you. Yuna did not know what to say, so she said nothing. Varth turned to face her. His eyes were old and tired, filled with an emotion she could not identify. You broke our laws, he said. You entered the sacred wing without permission. By our traditions, this is a crime worthy of death. Yuna's heart pounded, but she did not look away. But you also saved my children, Varth continued. You risked your life for them. A human risking death for a Kelthari cubs. I did not think such a thing was possible. He was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again, and his voice was softer than before. I have spent my entire life believing that humans were beneath us. Small, weak, ruled by emotions. I thought you were a species that could never understand honor or sacrifice. He paused. I was wrong. Yuna felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. The cubs have chosen you, Varth said. Their cry cannot be denied. In the eyes of our oldest laws, you are now part of my bloodline. You are their guardian. You are family. He placed his hand on her shoulder. It was a gesture of acceptance, Yuna realized. A gesture reserved for those who share blood. Welcome to my house, High Elder Varth said. May you bring as much honor to it as you have already shown. The weeks that followed changed everything for Yuna. She was no longer a low-ranking researcher living in the cramped human quarters. She was now a recognized member of High Elder Varth's bloodline. And that meant she lived in the upper levels of the station, in rooms that were larger than any space she had ever occupied. Her new chambers had high ceilings and walls, decorated with ancient Kelthari art. The bed was enormous, made for creatures much larger than her, but it was comfortable. The cubs had their own cradle in the corner, but they rarely used it. They preferred to sleep curled up next to Yuna, their small bodies warm against her side. Every morning, she woke to the sound of their soft chirping. Every night, she fell asleep to the rhythm of their breathing. She had never planned to become a mother, but that was what she was now. A mother to 3 alien cubs who had chosen her against all logic and tradition. The Kelthari, who passed her in the corridors, now behaved very differently than before. Instead of looking through her, they bowed their heads in respect. Some of them even spoke to her, greeting her with formal words and titles. It was strange and uncomfortable at first, but Yuna slowly got used to it. Teho visited her often. He had been promoted to senior communications officer after everything that happened. The Kelthari who used to ignore him now treated him with grudging respect. If one human could be worthy, perhaps others could be as well. The other humans on the station are being treated better, Taiho told her one evening. Not perfectly, but better. The Kelthari are starting to see us differently. Because of what happened with the cubs. Yuna asked. Because of you. You showed them something they did not expect. That humans can be brave. That humans can sacrifice themselves for others. That humans can love children who are not their own. He smiled. You are changing how they think about all of us. Commander Nari was also benefiting from the new situation. She had been invited to attend diplomatic meetings that were previously closed to humans. She was pushing for better treatment of human workers, better living conditions, better opportunities. And for the first time, the Kelthari were listening, but not everyone was happy about these changes. There were Kelthari who believed the bonding was a mistake. They whispered in corners and gathered in secret meetings. They called themselves the Traditionalists, and they believed that the purity of Kelthari bloodlines must be protected. A human could never be a true guardian, they said. The cubs must be defective. The bond must be broken. Una first learned about them from one of the Kelthari servants who cared for her chambers. The servant was young, barely an adult by Kelthari standards, and she spoke to Una with shy respect. You should be careful, the servant said one morning while changing the bedding. There are those who do not accept what the cubs have done. They speak against you when the High Elder is not listening. What do they say? Una asked, but the servant hesitated. They say you have poisoned the cubs somehow, that you use human trickery to make them cry for you. They say you should be removed and the cubs should undergo a ritual of purification. Una felt a chill run down her spine. Purification? What does that mean? It is an old ceremony. Very old. It was used in ancient times when a cub bonded with someone unworthy. The bond would be broken through sacred rituals. The servant paused, her eyes troubled. But the process is harsh. Many cubs did not survive it. Una looked at the 3 cubs playing on the floor nearby. They were chasing each other around the furniture, tumbling and chirping with joy. They looked so healthy now, so full of life. The thought of anyone hurting them made her blood burn with anger. I will not let that happen, she said quietly. The servant bowed her head. I hope you are strong enough to stop it. In the following weeks, Una learned everything she could about Kelthari culture. She attended lessons with the scholars who taught the histories and traditions. She learned the language, struggling with sounds that human throats were not designed to make. She studied the laws, the ceremonies, the social structures. She also learned how to care for the cubs properly. They were growing quickly, already larger than they had been when she first saved them. Their fur was thick and golden, their eyes bright with intelligence. They followed her everywhere she went, tumbling over each other in their eagerness to stay close. She named them in her heart, though she did not speak the names out loud. Kelthari cubs were not given formal names until their first birthday, when a great ceremony would be held. But Una could not think of them without names. The largest one, who was always the bravest, she called Haniel. The middle one, who was the cleverest and most curious, she called Jiho. The smallest one, who was the gentlest and most affectionate, she called Miru. High Elder Vorath watched her with the cubs. He did not say much, but she could see something changing in his eyes. At first, there had been confusion and doubt. Now there was something else. Something that might have been approval. One day, he came to her chambers unannounced. The cubs immediately ran to him, chirping their greetings. He knelt down and let them climb over him, their small claws catching in his fur. For the first time, Una saw him smile. They are strong, he said. Stronger than they were before the accident. The healers say they have recovered completely. I am glad, Una said. Vorath stood up, the cubs still clinging to his arms. I have been watching you. How you care for them. How you learn our ways. How you treat my people with respect, even when they do not deserve it. Una did not know how to respond. She simply nodded. There are those who say you do not belong here, Vorath continued. That your bonding with the cubs was a mistake. That you should be sent away and forgotten. I have heard such talk, Una admitted. And what do you say to them? Una thought for a moment. Then she spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. I say that I did not choose this bonding. The cubs chose it. I only did what any person should do when children are in danger. I tried to save them. Everything that happened after was because of them, not because of me. Varth was quiet for a long time. The cubs had settled in his arms, watching the conversation with curious eyes. In 3 weeks, the Festival of First Light will be held, he finally said. It is the most important ceremony of our year. The cubs will be presented to all of Kelthari society for the first time. You will stand with them as their guardian. Yuna's heart skipped. Is that wise? The traditionalists will attend, Varth said firmly. And they will see you stand beside my heirs with full honors. They will see that I accept you, that my bloodline accepts you, and they will understand that any attack on you is an attack on my house. He moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. You asked me once why the cubs chose you, he said. I did not have an answer then, but I think I understand now. They chose you because you were willing to die for them, because you loved them before you even knew them, because your human heart, which we have always mocked as weak, was strong enough to run into fire for strangers. He paused. Perhaps that is not weakness at all. Perhaps that is something else entirely. Then he left, and Yuna was alone with the cubs. She gathered them into her arms and held them close. Haniel chirped and nuzzled her neck. Jiho played with her hair. Miru pressed against her heart and made the soft humming sound that meant contentment. 3 weeks until the festival. 3 weeks until she would face the entire Kelthari civilization. 3 weeks to prove that a human could truly belong. The Festival of First Light was held in the Great Hall of the station. It was the largest room Yuna had ever seen, with ceilings so high they disappeared into darkness and walls covered with golden carvings that told the history of the Kelthari people. Thousands of Kelthari filled the hall, their golden fur gleaming under the warm lights. They had come from across the sector to witness this ceremony. Yuna stood in a small room behind the main stage, waiting for her moment. She wore the traditional robes of a guardian, white and gold, with symbols of Varth's bloodline embroidered on the sleeves. Taiho had helped her dress, his hand shaking slightly with nerves. You look like you belong, he had told her. You really do. The cubs were with their attendants, being prepared for their presentation. Yuna could hear them chirping in the next room. They sounded happy, unaware of the tension that filled the air. Commander Nari stood beside her now, watching the crowd through a gap in the curtains. The traditionalists are here. About 50 of them standing together near the eastern wall. They are led by an elder named Korath. He's the one who has been speaking loudest against you. What do you think they will do? Yuna asked. I do not know. They would not dare attack you physically, not here, not in front of so many witnesses. But they might try to disrupt the ceremony. Challenge your right to stand as guardian. Nari turned to look at her. Are you ready for that? Yuna was not sure she was ready for anything. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her throat. But she nodded anyway. I have to be. The ceremony began with ancient chants sung by the Kelthari priests. The crowd fell silent as the deep voices echoed through the hall. Then High Elder Varath stepped onto the main stage, and everyone bowed their heads in respect. He spoke for several minutes about the importance of this day, about the continuation of his bloodline, about the traditions that had guided his people for thousands of years. His voice was strong and steady, filling every corner of the massive hall. Then he called for the cubs to be brought forward. The attendants carried them onto the stage. 3 small bundles of golden fur. The crowd murmured with appreciation. These were the heirs of the High Elder, the future leaders of their people. They were precious beyond measure. Then Vorath spoke the words that changed everything. As tradition demands, I now call forward the guardian of my heirs, the one whom they chose through the sacred cry of bonding, the one who will stand beside them as protector and family. He turned toward the curtains. Come forward, Yuna of the humans. The crowd went still. Yuna stepped out from behind the curtain and walked onto the stage. The silence was heavy, pressing against her from all sides. Thousands of golden eyes watched her every movement. She walked to where Vorath stood with the cubs. She bowed her head respectfully to him, then knelt down beside the infants. They immediately reached for her, chirping with joy. Miru climbed into her lap. Jiho grabbed her hand. Haniel pressed against her side. The crowd remained silent. No one knew how to react. Then a voice rang out from the eastern side of the hall. This is wrong. An old Kelthari pushed forward through the crowd. His fur was gray with age, but his eyes burned with anger. This was Korath, the leader of the traditionalists. Behind him, his followers moved forward as well. This human has no right to stand as guardian, Korath said loudly. She is not of our blood. She is not of our species. The bonding was a mistake, a corruption. The cubs must be purified. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some of the Kelthari looked uncertain. Others nodded in agreement with Korath. Vorath's eyes narrowed. The cubs chose her. The cry of bonding cannot be denied. The cubs are infants, Korath replied. They do not know what they are doing. This human has somehow tricked them, poisoned their minds. We have all heard the stories of human manipulation, their emotional weapons, their ability to cloud the judgment of others. That is a lie, Yuna said. Her voice was clear and steady, cutting through the noise. I did nothing but save them. I crawled through fire and poison to reach them. I held them in my arms when they were dying. Whatever bond exists between us, I did not create it. They did. Korath turned his burning gaze on her. You should not speak here. You are unworthy. You are a creature of flesh and weakness, not a true guardian. The cubs in Yuna's arms began to make distressed sounds. They could feel the tension, the anger in the air. Miru whimpered and pressed closer to her chest. Look at them, Yuna said, gesturing to the cubs. They are frightened. Not of me. Of you. Of your anger and hate. She stood up, holding all 3 cubs in her arms. I do not care what you think of humans. I do not care what you think of me. But these children chose me, and I will protect them with everything I am. Korath laughed bitterly. Protect them? You are just a human. What can you possibly protect them from? I protected them from death, Yuna replied, when no one else could reach them. When your rescue teams failed and your technology broke down, I was small enough to fit through the maintenance shaft. I was determined enough to keep crawling, even when the poison was filling my lungs. I was stubborn enough to refuse to give up. She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving Korath's face. You call humans weak because we feel emotions. But my emotions are why I ran into that fire. You call us primitive because we have short lives. But maybe that makes every moment more precious to us. Maybe that is why we fight so hard for the ones we love. The crowd was completely silent now. Every eye was fixed on the small human woman standing before them. 3 cubs held protectively in her arms. Then the cubs did something unexpected. Hanaul, the bravest one, lifted his head. Jiho and Miru followed. They opened their mouths, and they made the cry of bonding again. But this time, it was different. This time, the cry was louder, stronger, more powerful than anything the Kelthari had ever heard. It rang through the great hall like a bell, vibrating in the bones of everyone present. It was not just a cry of recognition. It was a declaration. The Kelthari believed that the cry of bonding had levels. The first cry meant acceptance. But there was a second cry, spoken of only in the oldest legends, a cry that had not been heard for thousands of years. It was called the cry of kin. It meant more than acceptance. It meant that the cubs recognized someone as their true mother. This was that cry. The sound filled the hall, echoing off the walls and ceiling. It went on and on. 3 small voices blended into one. Even Korath fell silent, his face pale with shock. When the cry finally ended, High Elder Vorath stepped forward. He placed his hand on Yuna's shoulder, the gesture of blood family. "The cubs have spoken again," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "They have made the cry of kin, a cry that has not been heard in 5,000 years. They have declared this human to be more than a guardian. They have declared her to be their mother." He turned to face the crowd, his eyes hard and commanding. "Let no one question their voice. Let no one challenge her right. She is family. She is blood. And any attack on her is an attack on my house." The silence stretched for one long moment. Then, from somewhere in the back of the crowd, a single Kelthari raised his voice in the traditional roar of acceptance. Another joined him. Then another. Soon the entire hall was filled with the sound. Thousands of voices roaring together in honor of the human woman who had become one of them. Korath and his followers stood in silence, surrounded by the roar of acceptance. They had lost. The cubs had spoken, and their voice was louder than any tradition. Yuna stood on the stage, the cubs in her arms, tears streaming down her face. She was not sad. She was overwhelmed. She had come to this station as an unwanted guest, a tolerated outsider. Now she was family. Taiho and Commander Nari watched from the side of the stage. Taiho was crying openly. Nari was smiling, her eyes bright with pride. This was not just a victory for Yuna. It was a victory for all humans. Proof that they could earn their place among the stars. Not through power or technology, but through courage and love. Yuna looked down at the 3 cubs in her arms. Haniel, Jiho, and Miru. Her children now in every way that mattered. "I will always protect you," she whispered. "No matter what comes. I will always be here." They chirped happily and pressed against her heart. And in that moment, Yuna understood something she had never known before. Humanity's place in the galaxy was not something that would be given to them. It would be earned. One act of courage at a time. One moment of love at a time. And she had just taken the first step.